Eleanor's hands tremble as she stares at a credit card statement, 53,000 in a single day. The charges are outrageous. Tiffany & Co., Cartier, a premium spa, first-class tickets to Paris. She recalls Arthur, her late husband, and the quiet house. Celeste's mocking text arrives. Love the treats, mother-in-law. Thanks for being so generous. Photos from Paris show Celeste flaunting expensive jewelry, igniting Eleanor's humiliation. Eleanor realizes Celeste must have taken the card during a hug goodbye. She reflects on 3 years of trying to appease Celeste, fearing losing her son, Ethan. Ethan calls, asking if Eleanor gave Celeste permission for the anniversary trip. Eleanor's voice is steady. I never gave anyone permission to use my credit card. That's called theft, Ethan. Ethan mentions messages from Eleanor and Dr. Miller's comments on grief affecting memory. Eleanor pushes back. $53,000 is not a misunderstanding. Ethan claims Celeste said it was just a few thousand for the hotel and souvenirs. Eleanor's instruction, Ethan, check your wife's luggage when you get back. Check her jewelry box. As she hangs up, a forgotten determination begins to simmer within Eleanor. Eleanor's hands trembled. The thin paper of the credit card statement, a fragile witness to the impossible. $53,000 in a single day. Her eyes, usually steady and observant, blurred over the figure, then snapped into focus, as if demanding her full comprehension of the stark, numerical reality. It wasn't a mistake, not a decimal point misplaced, not a phantom charge. It was there, bold and undeniable. 53,000. Her breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in the quiet sanctity of her living room. The itemized list read like a cruel parody of luxury, a roll call of indulgence that made Eleanor's stomach clench. Tiffany & Company, Cartier. A premium spa package, complete with diamond dust facials and a personal masseuse. And then the final, most galling entries, first-class tickets to Paris, followed by lavish hotel charges. Paris, the city of romance, of dreams, now twisted into a symbol of blatant betrayal. The quiet house, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, echoing with the ghost of Arthur's calm presence. He would have known what to do. He would have faced this with his customary strength. But Arthur was gone, and Eleanor was left to navigate this new, treacherous landscape alone. Just as the hot flush of confusion began to curdle into a chilling certainty, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Celeste. A picture popped up first. Celeste, bathed in the soft, romantic glow of the Eiffel Tower, a wide, triumphant smile plastered across her face. Around her neck gleamed a diamond pendant, unmistakably new, and on her wrist a heavy gold bracelet, glinting with a familiar predatory sheen. Then came the words, a digital sneer that cut deeper than any spoken insult. Love the treats, mother-in-law. Thanks for being so generous. The air left Eleanor's lungs in a silent gasp. The humiliation was a physical ache, sharp and sudden. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The farewell hug at Arthur's memorial just weeks prior. Celeste clinging a little too long, her hand resting momentarily on Eleanor's purse. Eleanor, lost in the bittersweet melancholy of remembering her beloved husband, hadn't noticed a thing. She had simply embraced her son's wife, grateful for the outward show of affection. But it hadn't been affection. It had been calculated, cold-blooded larceny. A wave of exhaustion washed over Eleanor as she sank onto the sofa. For 3 years, ever since Arthur's passing, she had walked on eggshells around Celeste. She had tolerated the condescending remarks, the subtle slights, the barely veiled criticisms of her home, her cooking, her life. All of it she had endured out of a desperate, primal fear of losing Ethan, her only son. Celeste had held that fear like a weapon, wielding it with casual cruelty, subtly manipulating Eleanor's actions, always pushing for more, always demanding, always taking. Eleanor had convinced herself that appeasing Celeste was the only way to maintain a connection with Ethan, to keep her family together in the aftermath of Arthur's death. This theft, this brazen act of spite, shattered that fragile illusion. Her appeasement had only fueled the monster. The phone rang again, startling her. Ethan, her son, her gentle, well-meaning Pomspa, who had somehow become blind to his wife's machinations. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself. She would not allow her voice to waver. She would not give Celeste or Ethan the satisfaction of hearing her break. "Mom, is everything okay?" Ethan's voice, filtered through the static of an international call, sounded concerned yet distant. "Celeste just told me you sent her a really sweet anniversary message and that you wanted us to use your card for a special trip. Is that true?" Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. Her voice, when it came, was steady, unwavering, a calm she hadn't known she possessed just moments before. "Ethan," she said, each word distinct, purposeful. "I never gave anyone permission to use my credit card, and I certainly didn't send Celeste any message about a trip. That's called theft, Ethan." A beat of stunned silence stretched between them, across continents. Then Ethan's nervous chuckle. "Mom, come on, are you sure? Celeste said you were really excited for us. She even mentioned you messaged her specifically about it. And you know, Dr. Miller did say that grief can sometimes affect memory." Eleanor felt a cold fury begin to rise. He was using Dr. Miller's words against her, subtly questioning her sanity, her memory, her very ability to distinguish fact from fiction. "Ethan," she cut him off, her voice still low but laced with an unyielding edge. 53,000 is not a misunderstanding. It's not a forgotten text message. It's a very clear, very deliberate act. 53,000? Ethan sounded genuinely shocked this time. The feigned concern in his voice was replaced by genuine disbelief. "Celeste said it was just a few thousand for the hotel and some souvenirs." Eleanor closed her eyes, picturing the glittering jewelry in Celeste's Paris photos, the designer tags, the blatant opulence. "Ethan," she said, her voice now dangerously quiet, "when you get back, I want you to do something for me. Check your wife's luggage. And then I want you to check her jewelry box." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, but didn't wait for a response. Eleanor pressed the end call button, the finality of the click resounding in the silence. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window pane, seeing a woman she barely recognized. The grief and sorrow had clouded her vision for too long, but in that moment, as the ghost of humiliation faded, a forgotten determination began to simmer within Eleanor. A resolve she hadn't felt since Arthur was alive, a quiet strength she would need, now more than ever. Sleep was an impossible concept for Eleanor that night. The quiet darkness of her bedroom, usually a sanctuary, felt oppressive, filled with the spectral image of Celeste's smug, triumphant smile from the Paris photo. It was a smile that now, in retrospect, seemed to have always been there, lurking beneath a thin veneer of politeness. Every slight, every condescending word, every dismissive gesture from the past 3 years replayed in Eleanor's mind, a grim reel of Celeste's calculated cruelties. She remembered the wedding day itself, a blur of white lace and forced smiles. Ethan, radiant with happiness, had been oblivious. Eleanor, however, still felt the sting of Celeste's oversight. Her and Arthur's reserved seats, front row as the parents of the groom, had been given to distant cousins. Eleanor had stood patiently at the back of the church, Arthur's hand a comforting anchor on her arm, until an usher eventually found them, chairs tucked away near a side door. It had been a minor incident, easily dismissed at the time as wedding day chaos, but now it felt like a deliberate act of effacement. And then, at the reception, the photographer had been instructed to get candid shots of just the young people, leaving Eleanor and Arthur, the anchors of the family, subtly cropped out of the majority of the formal albums. Early warning signs, whispered the sleepless night, that she had been too kind, too trusting, too busy grieving to truly see. Then came the memory of last Christmas. Eleanor had meticulously chosen a delicate cashmere scarf for Celeste, a soft shade of blue she knew Celeste favored. She had even gift-wrapped it herself, tying a neat satin bow. Days later, while volunteering at the annual Goodwill holiday drive, she had stumbled upon it. The very same scarf, still bearing the faint scent of the new wool, tucked into a donation bin, its pristine tag now accompanied by the familiar orange Goodwill pricing sticker. Eleanor had felt a cold knot form in her stomach then, a confusion she couldn't articulate. Now the meaning was stark, a blatant rejection, a casual dismissal of her love and effort. Mother's Day brunch, a tradition Eleanor had cherished, became another flashpoint. She had spent hours preparing her famous quiche and a delicate lemon cake, recipes passed down through generations. Celeste had taken one look at the spread, smiled thinly, and declared, "Oh, how authentic, just like a true grandmother's kitchen, straight from a bygone era." The words had been delivered with a saccharine sweetness that made the belittlement all the more potent. It wasn't praise, it was an archaeological assessment, a way of marking Eleanor and her traditions as quaint, outdated relics. The passive-aggressive comments about her house, the one she and Arthur had built together, were constant. "It's so charmingly vintage, Eleanor, but perhaps a bit drafty for a woman living alone." Or, "Don't you worry, being out here by yourself, it's not safe, at your age." Each remark, seemingly cloaked in concern, was a subtle jab, eroding her confidence, chipping away at her sense of autonomy. They were carefully planted seeds of doubt, designed to make her question her own judgment, her ability to care for herself. And Ethan, oh, Ethan, how had she missed it? The way he had started to look at her, not with the easy, unconditional love of a son, but with a subtle assessment, a slight narrowing of his eyes whenever Celeste made one of her pointed remarks, as if he were weighing her responses, judging her reactions against his wife's narrative. The thought twisted Eleanor's heart with a fresh wave of pain. Had she truly lost her son to this woman's influence? Celeste's manipulations were like a masterclass in psychological warfare. The way she would casually pick up Eleanor's purse during visits, ostensibly to admire the craftsmanship, but then leave it subtly rearranged as if checking its contents. The way she would speak loudly and slowly to Eleanor in public, feigning concern about her hearing, or interject with, "Oh, you remember that, don't you, Eleanor? Your memory can be a bit tricky lately." It was all designed to isolate Eleanor, to cast her as frail and forgetful, to diminish her credibility in the eyes of others, and perhaps even in her own eyes. Then came the financial probes. Celeste would casually suggest automating all of Eleanor's bill payments, insisting it was safer and would ease her burden. She'd recommend a fantastic financial advisor, a friend of hers, of course, who could streamline Eleanor's investments. The most insidious suggestion had been adding Ethan as a signatory to all of Eleanor's accounts, just in case anything ever happened to you, Mom. Eleanor had politely declined each time, citing Arthur's meticulous estate planning, but the persistence had been unsettling. Now she understood. These weren't suggestions born of concern. They were reconnaissance missions, attempts to gain access, to chip away at her financial independence. It was sickeningly clear now. Celeste hadn't just been cruel. She had weaponized Eleanor's grief, twisting it into a narrative of frailty and incompetence. She had painted Eleanor as a vulnerable widow, ripe for the picking, a convenient target whose assets could be slowly, systematically plundered. With a cold, quiet resolve, Eleanor reached for her laptop. Her fingers, no longer trembling, typed in her banking credentials. The Paris charges were just the tip of the iceberg, she realized with dawning horror. Navigating through months of statements, her breath hitched again, but this time not from shock, but from a profound, chilling understanding. Unauthorized charges, smaller ones at first, a few $100s here, 1,000 there, high-end boutiques, specialty stores, luxury services, all disguised amidst her regular expenses, cleverly spaced out, never quite enough to trigger immediate suspicion in a grieving woman preoccupied with mourning. This wasn't an impulsive act, a spur-of-the-moment grab for a card. This was a carefully planned campaign, a slow, escalating theft designed to strip her bare little by little. Then a crucial detail caught her eye. The credit card used for the Paris spree and for many of the preceding, smaller charges wasn't her personal card. It was a corporate card, the one linked to Sterling & Co., at the successful architectural firm she and Arthur had built from the ground up, the business that was their legacy. Arthur had insisted they both have access, for business expenses, for their shared vision. And then, the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Ethan, their son, was also a signatory on the Sterling & Co. account. He had shared access, shared responsibility for that card, which meant this wasn't just theft. This wasn't merely credit card fraud. This was something far more serious, far more damaging. This was corporate fraud. Eleanor sat up straight in bed, the sheets rustling around her. The anger, sharp and hot, had finally coalesced into something cold and clear. The sorrow for her lost son, the humiliation, the pain of betrayal. They were still there, but beneath them, a new emotion stirred. A strategic, calculating calm. Her lips curved, not into a smile of warmth or joy, but into something sharper, something with teeth. The next morning, Eleanor woke not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet, burning purpose. She chose her attire with deliberate care, her navy Armani business suit, impeccably tailored, a relic from her days at the helm of Sterling and Company. The fabric felt familiar, a second skin of confidence she hadn't donned in years. She meticulously styled her hair, pulling it back into the elegant, no-nonsense chignon she used to favor, a stark contrast to the softer, looser style she'd adopted in her widowhood. As she gazed at her reflection, she no longer saw a grieving woman, nor a vulnerable widow. She saw Eleanor Sterling, co-founder of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, a woman who built an empire alongside her husband, a woman who understood numbers and strategy, a woman who commanded respect. The image, sharp and resolute, affirmed the shift within her. She drove downtown, the city traffic a familiar hum, a backdrop to her resurging focus, the Sterling and Co. Headquarters, a sleek glass and steel edifice, rose against the morning sky. As she stepped into the polished lobby, the scent of fresh coffee and ambition filled the air. Sophia, the longtime receptionist, looked up from her computer, her eyes widening in surprise. "Eleanor, Mrs. Sterling, it's wonderful to see you. Is everything all right?" Sophia's concern was genuine, tinged with curiosity. Eleanor's visits had been rare since Arthur's passing, usually reserved for quiet check-ins with staff or an occasional board meeting. "Yes, Sophia, everything is perfectly fine," Eleanor replied, her voice calm and assured. "I'd like to speak with Margaret Davies, please. Is she available?" Margaret, the company's formidable financial advisor, had been a trusted ally of Arthur's for decades. A few minutes later, Margaret emerged from her office, her face a mask of professional composure, though Eleanor detected a flicker of veiled concern in her sharp, intelligent eyes. "Eleanor, it's good to see you," Margaret said, extending a firm hand. "What brings you in? I trust there's nothing amiss." Eleanor met her gaze directly. "Margaret, I need to review all recent transactions on the company credit cards, specifically the one linked to our primary operating account. And," she paused, letting the weight of the next word settle, "I also need to understand our current audit requirements, particularly concerning unauthorized expenditures." Her voice was entirely professional, betraying none of the turmoil she'd felt the night before. This wasn't a personal issue anymore. It was a business matter. Margaret led her to a private conference room, the large oak table, a silent witness to countless strategic discussions. Soon, printouts of financial statements and digital ledgers filled the space. For the next hour, they meticulously reviewed 8 months of transactions. Eleanor pointed to each suspicious entry, her finger tracing a growing pattern of deceit. The initial, smaller charges that had escaped her notice were now glaringly obvious, interspersed with legitimate business expenses. Margaret, her brow furrowed, began to annotate the statements. "Most of these vendors," she murmured, scanning the names of high-end boutiques and exclusive service providers, "are completely unrecognized within our usual operational scope, and the expense coding is often incorrect, attempting to mask the true nature of the purchases." Eleanor then pulled out her phone, displaying the photos Celeste had sent from Paris. She zoomed in, highlighting the glittering diamond bracelet on Celeste's wrist. "This," Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm, "was purchased with that card. It's listed here as an $18,000 marketing expense." Margaret's eyes widened, a sharp intake of breath the only sound in the room. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingertips together. "Eleanor," she said, her voice grave, "you understand the gravity of this, don't you? That's not just theft. That's fraud, corporate fraud. And given the amount, the duration, and the deliberate miscoding, this is a federal matter." Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the printouts. "Federal charges, IRS involvement, potential jail time," she recited, articulating the grim implications. A complex mix of emotions swirled within her, a nascent satisfaction at finally uncovering the full extent of the betrayal, battling with a profound dread for what this would mean for Ethan. He was a signatory. Even if he hadn't made the purchases, his name was on the account. He was implicated, whether he knew it or not. For the company's protection, Margaret continued, her voice firm, we need to file a fraud report immediately with the authorities. This cannot be ignored, Eleanor. It puts Sterling and Company at serious risk. Eleanor held up a hand. I understand, Margaret. Believe me, I do. But I need 24 hours. Just 24 hours to speak with Ethan first. She needed to look her son in the eye to see if he truly knew, if he was complicit, or if he was merely another victim of Celeste's insidious charm. Margaret hesitated, her professional instincts screaming at her to act faster. The liability for the company was immense. Eleanor, she began, a note of warning in her tone. Please, Margaret, Eleanor interrupted, a flicker of raw plea in her eyes. He's my son. Just 24 hours. Sighing, Margaret finally relented. Very well, but I will immediately freeze the account. No further charges will be made, effective immediately, and I will begin compiling all the necessary documentation. If I don't hear back from you in 24 hours, or if you don't proceed with filing the report, I will be compelled to act on behalf of the company. Eleanor nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the ticking clock. The freeze on the account was a small victory, a temporary halt to the bleeding. But the real battle, she knew, was just beginning. The day after her meeting with Margaret, Eleanor retreated to her old office at Sterling and Company, a room she hadn't truly occupied since Arthur's passing. Surrounded by familiar blueprints, architectural models, and the quiet hum of the firm, she immersed herself in the ledgers and statements. Her keen mind, sharpened by decades of business acumen, systematically pieced together the full scope of the fraud. The Paris spree was indeed merely the grand finale of a much longer, more insidious campaign. By the time she finished, the tally stood at an astonishing $75,000 over 8 months. It was a sum that made her reel, not just from the financial impact, but from the sheer audacity and sustained malice it represented. That night, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Eleanor made a calculated decision. Ethan had given her a spare key to his house years ago, just in case. The thought of using it for such a purpose felt like a violation. Yet the urgent need for answers propelled her forward. She knew they were still in Paris, soaking up the last moments of their ill-gotten luxury. The house would be empty. Sliding the key into the lock, Eleanor felt a tremor of trepidation, quickly replaced by resolve. Inside, the house was immaculate, decorated with an almost sterile sense of expensive taste. Designer furniture, abstract art, polished surfaces, all reflecting Celeste's penchant for superficial grandeur. But as Eleanor moved through the quiet rooms, a different truth began to emerge. On the kitchen counter, tucked beneath a glossy magazine, was a stack of unopened mail. Past due notices screamed from utility bills. A grim collection of credit card statements from various institutions, their balances distressingly high, lay alongside them. Overdue mortgage payments, red-flagged warnings about Celeste's BMW loan. It painted a clearer picture of severe financial precarity, a lifestyle far beyond their means. Celeste wasn't just indulging. She was desperately trying to keep up appearances, using Eleanor's wealth as a personal bailout. Eleanor ascended the stairs, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. In the master bedroom, the air still faintly perfumed with Celeste's expensive scent. She found it, the ornate velvet-lined jewelry box on Celeste's dresser. With a deep breath, Eleanor opened it. Inside, nestled among other trinkets, were pieces she recognized from the credit card statements. The delicate pearl earrings charged as client entertainment, the heavy gold chain recorded as office supplies, and the diamond pendant from the Paris photo, its sparkle now seeming predatory. It was a tangible timeline of theft, laid bare before her eyes. Her gaze then fell on a small, discreetly hidden bottom drawer in Celeste's bedside table. Something compelled her to open it. Inside, a manila folder surprisingly thin caught her attention. It was labeled in Celeste's neat, looping script, Financial Planning. Eleanor's heart began to pound with a sickening drumbeat. She pulled it out. The contents were even more chilling than she could have imagined. Printouts of Eleanor's property records, her house, the lake house Arthur had left her, even the small vacation cottage. Arthur's obituary, carefully clipped from the newspaper, with all of his business accomplishments highlighted in a neon yellow marker. Pages from internet searches, dog-eared and annotated. Inheritance laws for surviving spouse. Power of attorney procedures for elderly parents. How to establish diminished mental capacity. Celeste hadn't been content with just stealing what was readily available. She had been planning to take everything. And then, at the very bottom, tucked beneath a printout of a trust fund article, was a small, cream-colored note card. Handwritten in the same elegant script, the words were a dagger to Eleanor's soul. Timeline established pattern of confusion. Memory issues. Get added to accounts by summer. PA by Christmas. Full access within 18 months. Eleanor felt a cold, visceral shock. This wasn't merely greed. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. Celeste wasn't just a thief. She was a predator, systematically planning to dispossess Eleanor of her entire life, her home, her legacy, all under the guise of caring for a fragile widow. The realization hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Celeste had been meticulously building a case against her, fabricating a narrative of mental decline, setting the stage to seize control. Eleanor carefully photographed every single document with her phone, ensuring the images were clear and legible. Then, with a practiced hand, she replaced everything exactly as she had found it, leaving no trace of her intrusion. The key slid back into her purse. Back in her own quiet, orderly home, Eleanor poured herself a measure of Arthur's favorite single malt scotch, the amber liquid glinting under the soft lamplight. She sat in his armchair, the warmth of the glass a small comfort against the chill of revelation. She had been playing checkers, moving her pieces in a predictable defensive pattern, trying to keep her family together. Celeste, however, had been playing chess, calculating several moves ahead, orchestrating a grand, devastating endgame. The thought brought a strange, grim clarity. Just then, her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Flying home tomorrow, we should talk." Eleanor looked at the message, then at the untouched scotch, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across her lips. A smile that held a glint of the old Eleanor, the businesswoman who knew how to close a deal, who knew how to protect her assets. She typed her response, her fingers moving with quiet certainty. "Yes, we should. Come by Sunday evening. Bring Celeste. There's something we all need to discuss." The game, she realized, was about to enter its final, most decisive phase. If you're gripped by this story, don't miss a single twist. Hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to hear how Eleanor unravels Celeste's web of deceit. Eleanor spent her Sunday in a quiet rhythm of domesticity, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She cooked Ethan's favorite pot roast, the rich aroma of slow-simmering beef and vegetables filling the house. The familiar routine was a calming anchor, allowing her to channel her focus, preparing not just a meal, but the stage for the inevitable confrontation. Every cut of a carrot, every stir of the gravy, was a measured step towards the truth. Precisely at 7 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Celeste and Ethan arrived, a study in contrasts. Celeste, radiant and impeccably dressed in a new designer dress Eleanor recognized from a high-end boutique she had seen on the statements, her diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist, exuded an air of triumphant confidence. She swept in, embracing Eleanor with a theatrical flourish. "Eleanor, darling, we missed you so much. I know you can get anxious when you can't reach Ethan, but our phones were constantly dying with all the sightseeing." It was a subtle dig, a reminder of her supposed frailty, but Eleanor merely smiled, playing along for now. Ethan, however, looked utterly exhausted. His usually vibrant eyes were shadowed, and faint lines of stress creased his forehead. He gave Eleanor a tight hug, his touch hesitant. Eleanor observed him carefully, seeing the internal struggle etched on his face, the weight of his wife's deceit pressing down on him, even if he didn't yet fully grasp its magnitude. They settled around the dining table, the aroma of pot roast, a warm counterpoint to the growing tension. Eleanor began with pleasantries, asking about their trip. Celeste launched into a vivid, breathless description of their Parisian adventures, The exquisite meals, the breathtaking views, the exclusive shops. She painted a picture of unbridled luxury, meticulously avoiding any mention of cost, only hinting at the generosity that made it all possible. At one point, Celeste casually extended her arm, allowing the diamond bracelet to catch the light. "Oh, this old thing," she said, feigning modesty as Eleanor's gaze lingered on the familiar sparkle. "I've had it forever. It was a gift from my grandmother, actually. Just had it cleaned." Eleanor's eyes flickered to Ethan, who seemed to shrink slightly in his chair, avoiding her gaze. He had seen the Paris photos. He knew the bracelet was new. The meal concluded, the small talk becoming increasingly strained. As Eleanor cleared the plates, she took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. "I wanted to talk to you both about something," she began, her voice calm, carefully modulated. "I've been reviewing some financial statements, as you know. Since Arthur's passing, it's become my responsibility to oversee everything." Celeste's fork, poised to pick up a last morsel of pot roast, froze midair. Her smile, however, remained plastered on her face, unnervingly fixed. "Oh, what kind of charges, Eleanor? Is everything in order?" Her tone was a carefully crafted blend of concern and casual disinterest. "Well," Eleanor continued, maintaining a steady gaze, "it seems as though someone might have gained unauthorized access to one of my credit cards. There have been some rather substantial and unusual charges." Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Zuri," he said, turning to Celeste, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and accusation. "Didn't you say Mom gave you permission to use her card for the trip? You told me she insisted." Celeste's eyes widened, a picture of wounded innocence. "Ethan, how could you even suggest such a thing?" She turned to Eleanor, her voice dripping with betrayal. "Eleanor, I am shocked. I specifically remember you telling me, at Arthur's memorial, how much Arthur would have wanted us to celebrate our anniversary in style, that you wanted to do something special for us, and that you insisted I use your card. You even said something about making sure we were truly treasured. How could you forget such a heartfelt conversation?" Her performance was masterful, a fabricated memory woven with emotional manipulation, designed to make Eleanor doubt herself, to cast her as the forgetful, grieving widow. "That's interesting," Eleanor said softly, her voice betraying nothing. She rose and walked to a side table, retrieving a slim folder. She returned to the table and, with deliberate movements, spread several pages of financial statements across the polished wood surface. These weren't the personal credit card statements Celeste had expected. These were the crisp, corporate-branded statements from Sterling and Company. "You see, Celeste," Eleanor explained, her voice gaining a steely edge, "the card you used wasn't one of my personal credit cards. This," she tapped the Sterling and Company logo on the top left corner, "is a corporate account, an active business account." Ethan's face, already pale, turned ashen. He pushed back his chair, a raw gasp escaping his lips. "Mom, I don't understand," he stammered, his eyes darting between the statements and his mother's impassive face. "You said the business was being down. You said everything was settled after Dad." "The business is still active, Ethan," Eleanor stated, cutting him off with quiet authority. "Arthur's final wishes were that it continue to operate, albeit on a smaller scale, with Margaret overseeing things. And with an active business comes very specific federal audit requirements. Requirements that mean every single transaction, especially one of this magnitude, needs to be accounted for, categorized correctly, and transparent." Celeste's composure, which had been so meticulously maintained, finally cracked. Her lips, which had been curved into a practiced smile, now thinned into a tight, angry line. "This is ridiculous, Eleanor. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a credit card mix-up. Anyone could make a mistake." Eleanor met Celeste's furious gaze, her own eyes unwavering. $75,000 isn't a mix-up, Celeste," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "It's fraud. Corporate fraud." Ethan gasped again, pushing his chair back further, scraping against the floorboards, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. $75,000. The sheer weight of the number seemed to crush him. Eleanor didn't wait for him to process it. She reached into her folder again, pulling out more statements, spreading them out like a damning hand of cards. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? She continued, her voice low and even. Because this isn't just about Paris. It's about months of smaller, unauthorized purchases. Purchases you disguised as business expenses, hoping I, in my confusion, wouldn't notice. The game, Eleanor thought, was truly afoot. The heavy silence that followed Eleanor's revelation was shattered by Ethan. His face, once pale, now burned with a mixture of shock and dawning fury. He turned to Celeste, his voice deadly quiet, each word a slow, deliberate accusation. Zuri, you've been using Mom's business account for months. $75,000? Celeste, stripped of her carefully constructed facade, bristled. Her eyes, usually so captivating, now held a glint of desperation. What's the big deal, Ethan? She has plenty of money. The business was just sitting there doing nothing. It wasn't hurting anyone. Her attempt at justification was as flimsy as it was arrogant. Ethan's voice, initially quiet, rose with outrage, tinged with a horrifying realization of their predicament. Not hurting anyone? Celeste, this isn't some dusty personal savings account. This is a corporate account. The business that could send us both to federal prison if the IRS decides we're running a fraud scheme. The business that I'm authorized on, which makes me complicit. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely shattered. The full weight of his involvement, the legal ramifications, began to sink in. Celeste, seeing the conversation shifting away from her, quickly reverted to deflection, attempting to turn the tables on Eleanor. Well, what about what she's done, Celeste spat, gesturing wildly at Eleanor. Sitting on all that money, all that wealth, while we're drowning in debt. We can barely afford the mortgage, Ethan. My car is almost repossessed. We needed this. Ethan didn't even acknowledge Celeste's desperate plea for sympathy. He began to pace the floor, his movements jerky, agitated. His heart was visibly breaking, the man Eleanor knew slowly disintegrating before her eyes. By stealing from her, he mumbled, his voice heavy with self-loathing. By making me an accessory to fraud. You've jeopardized everything, Celeste. My career, our future. Eleanor watched the unraveling drama with a quiet, somber resolve. This was the moment. She reached for her phone, unlocking it with a practiced hand. Ethan, she said, her voice cutting through Celeste's increasingly frantic justifications. There's something else you need to see. She pushed the phone across the table, displaying the first image from her visit to their house. Ethan picked it up, scrolling through the photos Eleanor had taken. His expression, which had been a mix of anger and bewilderment, slowly hardened, growing colder, more distant. He saw the overdue bills, the notices, the jewelry. Then he came to the photos of the folder, the property records, the highlighted obituary, the internet searches on inheritance laws and power of attorney. Each image was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing Celeste's carefully constructed narrative of love and shared desperation. Finally, he reached the last image, Celeste's handwritten note. He read it aloud, his voice devoid of emotion, a humorless laugh escaping him, chilling in its emptiness. Timeline established pattern of confusion, memory issues, get added to accounts by summer, PA by Christmas, full access within 18 months. Ethan looked up, his eyes now completely devoid of warmth, fixed on Celeste. In that agonizing moment, Eleanor witnessed it, the exact moment his love died. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, agonizing extinguish. The light in his eyes, which had flickered for so long, finally went out. You were planning to take everything, he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet infused with an unimaginable depth of pain. Not just from Mom, from me too. You were going to frame her, Celeste. You were going to make it seem like she was losing her mind, and then you were going to take it all. Celeste's face contorted, her denial desperate, frantic. No, it's not like that. I love you, Ethan. I was doing this for us, to secure our future. Your mother has so much, and she wasn't using it. Her pleas were hollow, her words ringing with a self-serving desperation. Ethan's voice when he responded was steady and cold, a stark contrast to his earlier anguish. No, Celeste. You were doing this for you. You've been lying to me for months, lying about everything. About your financial troubles, About mom giving you permission, about your plans. You don't love me. You love what you thought I could give you or what you could take through me. Defeated, Celeste resorted to her oldest weapon, attack. Her eyes, narrowed and venomous, turned on Eleanor. This is all your fault, you old hag. You were never there for him growing up, always too busy with your precious business and your precious Arthur. You don't deserve his loyalty. You don't deserve anything. Before Eleanor could even process the vicious accusation, Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. Stop, he commanded, his eyes blazing, a protective instinct he hadn't shown in years suddenly resurfacing. Don't you dare talk about my mother that way. Ever. Celeste flinched, momentarily silenced by the force of his anger. Then a bitter, defeated laugh escaped her lips. Because now we're going to lose it all, aren't we three? She retorted, her voice raw with self-pity. Everything we have, everything we worked for, because of your righteous indignation. Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly through the exchange, slowly pushed back her chair. She felt a subtle ache in her knees, a reminder of her age, but as she stood, a profound sense of power settled over her. She looked at Celeste, her eyes calm, unyielding. Actually, Celeste, Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong, that depends entirely on what happens next. The game had changed, and Eleanor was now dictating the rules. With the full damning truth exposed, Eleanor walked to her desk and retrieved a manila folder. The weight of it, a tangible representation of the justice she sought. She returned to the dining table, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Now that we understand the scope of Celeste's actions, she began, her voice calm and authoritative, let's discuss the consequences. Her first term was delivered without preamble. Every single item purchased with company funds, starting with that diamond bracelet on your wrist, must be returned. Celeste instinctively clutched the bracelet, her face contorting in protest. That's impossible. Some of these things were gifts. They're not returnable. Eleanor met her gaze, a glacial calm in her eyes. Then you will return what you can, and for what you can't, you will pay cash for the full retail value. No negotiation, no depreciated cost. The exact price you charge the company. Celeste's carefully constructed mask finally shattered. With what money, Eleanor? You know we don't have that kind of cash. We're barely making ends meet. Her voice rose to a shriek. Then you'll figure it out, Eleanor responded, her tone as steady as stone. You'll get a job to sell your car, downsize your extravagant lifestyle. Because the alternative, she pushed a document across the table, a formal legal notice, is federal fraud charges. And I don't think orange is really your color, Celeste. Ethan, haggard and emotionally drained, slumped in his chair. Mom, he interjected, his voice barely a whisper. What else? You said consequences, plural. He knew his mother, and he knew this was only the beginning. Eleanor nodded, pulling out another document. Second, Celeste will sign a promissory note for $78,467, the total amount stolen, to be repaid to Sterling and Company over the next 5 years, with interest, every cent. Celeste gasped, then shrieked, We can't afford that. You're being unreasonable. You should have thought of that, Eleanor replied, her voice still infuriatingly calm, before you decided to finance your lifestyle with my money, Celeste. Third, Eleanor continued, ignoring Celeste's sputtering indignation, you will sign a sworn statement admitting your unauthorized use of company funds. This statement will be held as insurance. Should you ever attempt to contact me, my home, or my business again, or violate any other terms, it will be immediately submitted to the authorities, along with all the evidence I've gathered. Celeste's face paled, the last vestiges of her defiance draining away. You're trying to destroy me, she whispered, her voice laced with fear. No, Celeste, Eleanor countered, her voice devoid of pity. You destroyed yourself. I am merely outlining the consequences of your choices. Eleanor then laid out the final, most painful consequence. And finally, Celeste, you will have no contact with me, my home, or my business ever again. Celeste erupted. You can't do that. You can't cut me off from family. What about Ethan? What about any future grandchildren? Her voice cracked with a mixture of rage and desperation, though Eleanor knew it was less about family and more about the loss of a potential revenue stream. Eleanor looked directly at Ethan. She saw not pain, but a flicker of profound relief in his eyes. Ethan is my son, Eleanor stated, her voice softening slightly as she addressed him directly. That connection remains, and he is free to visit me whenever he chooses. But you, she turned back to Celeste, her voice hardening once more. You have proven that you cannot be trusted, Celeste. You cannot be a part of my life or my home again. Celeste scoffed, calling Eleanor insane, accusing her of breaking up their marriage. This is what you want, isn't it? To tear us apart, to have Ethan all to yourself. Ethan, who had been silent for a beat, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm, resonating with a newfound conviction. She's right, Celeste, about all of it. There's right and wrong, and what you did was wrong. There's no justifying it. Celeste turned on Ethan, a torrent of pleas and accusations pouring out, blaming Eleanor's wealth for all their struggles, for her temptation. Ethan's frustration, held in check for too long, finally erupted. I read those documents, Celeste. Your timeline, your plans, you weren't trying to help our marriage. You were planning an exit strategy. He pointed to the phone still on the table. Then explain the research about divorce settlements in the same folder. So Celeste, explain that. Celeste froze. The air went out of her, her jaw dropping. She was utterly speechless, caught in the ultimate lie. Eleanor stood, feeling stronger than she had in years, the years of grief and vulnerability peeling away like an old skin. You have 48 hours to decide, Celeste. Either you sign these agreements, return the items, sign the promissory note, sign the admission of guilt, and agree to stay away from me, or I file the fraud report with the federal authorities and Margaret contacts the IRS. Celeste, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and fear, mustered one last attempt at defiance. And if I refuse, if I call your bluff? Eleanor's lips curved into a chilling smile devoid of warmth. Try me, Celeste. I spent 30 years in business building an empire. You're not nearly as intimidating as you think you are. Celeste's posture crumpled. The fight had drained from her. She pushed back her chair, scraping it against the floor, her movement jerky and defeated. She cast one last, weak threat at Eleanor, a promise of retribution that sounded hollow and pathetic. Then, without another word, she stormed out of the house. Eleanor watched her go, then turned to Ethan, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. I've been alone for 3 years, Celeste, she murmured, a final weary dismissal to the empty space where her daughter-in-law had been. The only difference is now I won't have to pretend otherwise. The silence after Celeste stormed out was thick, but this time it was a silence of relief, not tension. Ethan, his shoulders slumped, finally looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing remorse. Mom, he choked out, his voice hoarse. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I'm so sorry. Eleanor walked over to him, reaching out to cup his face in her hands. She saw her son, truly saw him for the first time in years, stripped bare of Celeste's influence, more and vulnerable. You were manipulated by someone very skilled, my dear, she said, her voice soft with understanding. Celeste was a master at it. We both made mistakes, Ethan. The important thing is that we see them now. He pulled her into a fierce, healing hug, a tight embrace that spoke volumes. In that moment, the chasm that Celeste had carved between them began to close. Their bond, once strained, reclaiming its rightful place. When he pulled back, his eyes were still red, but a glimmer of his old self was returning. What happens now with you and me? He asked, a fragile hope in his voice. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. Now we figure out how to be a family again, she said. Just the two of us for a while. We learn to trust each other, to listen to each other. She knew Celeste would land on her feet, of course. Predators always did. She would find someone new to manipulate, another unsuspecting target. But that was no longer Eleanor's concern. The very next morning, Ethan arrived with 2 suitcases, a sheepish grin on his face, and moved back into his childhood bedroom. The house, which had felt so empty for 3 years, began to hum with a quiet energy. Within 48 hours, a delivery service arrived at Eleanor's doorstep with a heavy box containing all the stolen items Celeste could return, along with a sealed envelope containing the signed agreements. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers were filed. Celeste, perhaps too shocked or too strategically calculating to fight, didn't contest. Eleanor watched it all unfold, not with vindication, but with a profound sense of quiet satisfaction. The monetary restitution was important, a matter of principle. But the real victory, the true prize, was getting Ethan back, reclaiming their relationship. That was priceless. 6 months later, the scent of Eleanor's famous blueberry pancakes filled the kitchen as Ethan joined her for Sunday breakfast. The house felt alive again, not just with his presence, but with a lightness Eleanor hadn't realized she'd missed. "Mom," Ethan said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Margaret just confirmed the final payment from Celeste came through. Sterling and Co. is formally dissolved." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, a feeling of closure washing over her. "Good," she simply stated. Then she looked at Ethan, a sparkle in her eye. "And speaking of new beginnings, I've decided to sell the house." Ethan nearly dropped his fork. "Well, the house? Mom, are you sure? This is where you and Dad, this is where Arthur and I built a life," Eleanor interrupted gently. "But it's also where I grieved. It's time for a fresh start. I've found a beautiful condo downtown, right on the waterfront. It has incredible light and a view that would make you swoon." Ethan's surprise quickly melted into genuine happiness. "Mom, that's amazing. You deserve to live somewhere that makes you excited, somewhere that's entirely yours for your new chapter." He then revealed his own news. "Actually, I also have something to tell you. I just got a job offer from Morrison Consulting. It's a fantastic opportunity, exactly what I need. And it means I'll finally be able to afford my own place again. A real fresh start." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride. Her son, once lost in a drift, was finding his way. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That's wonderful, darling. I'm so proud of you. But," she added playfully, a mischievous glint in her eye, "any future girlfriends will have to pass a much more rigorous inspection. You understand, don't you?" Ethan laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that filled the kitchen. "Oh, Mom, believe me. The next woman I bring home is going to have to understand that my mother is a force of nature, a legend, even." A week later, they stood on the balcony of the sleek waterfront condo, the city sparkling below them. "I'll take it," Eleanor said, a decisive nod of her head. Moving day was bittersweet. Sorting through decades of memories, Eleanor carefully packed photos of her and Arthur, of Ethan as a boy, of joyous family vacations. She paused at a handful of photos that included Celeste, then, with a quiet strength, placed them in a discard pile. Her life with Celeste was over, and there was no need to carry those memories into her new chapter. As she walked through the empty rooms of the old house one last time, the echoes of her past, both good and bad, faded into the silence. "Any regrets?" she mused aloud, addressing the ghost of her younger self. "None," she said, and meant it completely. Eleanor embraced her new life with gusto. She joined a book club, enrolled in a photography class, and found a walking group that explored the city's hidden gems. She made new friends, vibrant women who admired her resilience and spark. On her new condo balcony overlooking the shimmering water, Ethan raised a glass of champagne, celebrating her newfound freedom and the vibrant woman she had become. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so sorry it took me so long to find my way back." Eleanor clinked her glass against his, her eyes shining. "I'm not sorry about any of it, Ethan," she responded, her voice full of a profound wisdom. "Celeste taught me a valuable lesson. She taught me that I'm much stronger than I ever realized." She looked out at the boundless horizon, a radiant smile on her face. "Now I get to decide my future. Whatever I want, for the first time in my adult life, whatever I want."